In Article 3 in the Constitution, where it outlines the power of the judicial branch, it specifically says that the Supreme Court is the court of original jurisdiction under two cases. And that is when a state is a party to a lawsuit, so if states are suing each other, or if somebody is suing a state, then the federal court, the Supreme Court has the authority to adjudicate that. It does not say it has the authority to adjudicate it when the federal government is a party to the lawsuit, nor does it say anywhere in Article 3 that the Supreme Court or the judiciary branch is the arbiter of what the Constitution means. It doesn't say that they are the ombudsman to us. It doesn't say that they are the sergeant at arms. It doesn't say that they are the parliamentarian. It specifically says that they're the highest court in the land, and that is only in the authority that the federal government, which is where it is given authority in the first place. So when they try to tell you that the Supreme Court is the ultimate court over everything, Article 3 does not say that. In fact, have them show you that. Break it out and say, where does it say it? Because it doesn't say it. We just accepted it.
It's kind of like the separation of church and state thing that's in the Constitution too, that's not there. Supported slavery and Jim Crow. Well, as we mentioned earlier, one of the reasons South Carolina seceded from the Union because it was nullification. So that's a silly argument. Now, Jim Crow is not a silly argument. I mean, the states during the 1950s, during the Civil Rights Movement, there are several states that did try to use the concept of nullification and secession, or nullification rather, in trying to fight segregation. Bottom line is, they were wrong. You know, the federal government had the right to go in and fix that, and they did. But we're in a different situation now. This is the civil rights movement of the 21st century. You know, any tool can be misused. Nullification was used, for the most part, has been used correctly. But let's just say for the sake of argument that Romney had won the election. Let's just say for the sake of argument he had won. And the Congress was Democrat. And they decided to trump up false charges against the president and impeach him. And they impeached Romney. Let's say they did that. Would that make the concept of impeachment wrong just because they misused it? No, it's not wrong. It's just anything where human beings, any tool, any process can be misused by bad people. But you know, basically what happened in the civil rights movement is the federal government needed to come in and protect people from oppressive state regulations. And now the exact same opposite is true. We're being oppressed by a federal government that's taking away our civil liberties, our economic freedom, and the only way it's going to stop is if the states stand up for our liberty, just like the federal government had to stand up for liberty in the 1960s. So that, and again, they don't have the right to do it, or they should do it, or they can do it. Your elected state officials have an obligation and a duty to defend you against oppressive state federal regulations. Now, there's another part that really, this word right here is what makes people really squeamish. Interposition. Doesn't seem like that big of a word, but interposition is what will make any state politician squirm in their seat. What it basically means is what they did in the Joshua Glover case. Is that not only did they say it's unconstitutional, but they said we're going to do something about it. You can't take him out of the state. We're not going to let you arrest Sherman Booth. We're not going to let you take him out of the case. We're going to fight you every step of the way and make sure you don't oppress Sherman Booth. And that's what they did. They interposed themselves between an oppressive federal government and the citizen. I mentioned the National, you guys worked on the National Defense Authorization Act, Bob Marshall's bill last year? Okay, that was great and all, man, I'm not against it, but what all that really says is we're not going to help the federal government arrest you with NDAA. Okay, I don't think they're going to come, the guys in the big black limousines and the SUVs, and they come rolling in your front yard, are going to call your sheriff to come help arrest you on the NDAA. I mean, it doesn't really do anything. Now, I've heard, I haven't read the bill yet, but Texas actually is going to pass it. It's got a proposed bill on the table, according to what I read this morning, that actually says not only is it unconstitutional, but if you try to arrest somebody, we're going to prevent you from doing it. That's interposition. And without interposition, nullification is meaningless. There's been all sorts of nullification bills floating around. We actually nullified the health care law in 2010 with the Health Care Freedom Act. It's nullified. This is not, but until somebody from the state says we're not going to enforce it and we're going to make you not do it, it's worthless. Without interposition, nullification is just a lot of hot air. You going to say something?
Well, on the nullification of the NDAA, Chip's right. Basically, what Bob Marshall's law says is that we will not use state resources to help you in this unconscionable act of arresting someone without a warrant. Now, I take a little bit harsher tack against this than Chip does. I think that's akin to saying, if you want to grab our people off the streets without a warrant, we'll step out of the way and let you do it. That's what the state has really said. Now, they've touted this to us as this is them fighting back against the federal government. But there's no fight in there. What's in there is, we're going to get out of the way. And we're not going to have the sheriff stop them. We're not going to let your neighbors stop them. In fact, we're not even going to support you using a gun to stop them yourselves. We're going to get out of the way and let them snatch you, and who knows where you're going to go, and we don't care. But we're going to tell everybody that, gosh, we're tough against this. We're not going to use state resources to help them. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
So you want to talk about sheriff here?
Brad Rogers.
There's a question here.
Yes.
Who provides the interposition?
It would have to be the states or the sheriff, depending upon what the issue is. In fact, this is a good example because any constitutionally elected officer can interpose himself in the federal government if they're allowed, if their constitutional position gives them the authority to do so. So not only can the state do it, it has to be the state basically that would do it, but there's also situations where if you have a duly elected sheriff, they also have the constitutional authority. And you've heard of Sheriff Mack, Sheriff Joe, they're doing things like this in their jurisdictions based on the whole concept of interposition. So,
And that's what the story of Sheriff Brad Rogers is about. This happened within the last year. And I actually called Brad Rogers and talked to him on the phone for about a half an hour after I heard about this. But this is how this worked. On December 1st, he received a call from an Amish farmer. And the farmer said, I'm having a problem with the federal government. The FDA has been on my farm, and I don't want them there. They don't have a warrant. I don't want them noodling around in my stuff. I don't want them seizing my property. They don't have the right to do it. So Sheriff Rogers got on the phone to the FDA, and the FDA has a SWAT team. All the letter groups in the federal government now all have their own paramilitary forces. FDA has one, Social Security has one, they have armored tanks and machine guns and body armor, and that's what they're planning to do, is to show up on this farmer's farm and take all of his records, destroy the cows, because he's breaking, or because they feel that he might be breaking an FDA regulation. So he calls Sheriff Rogers and says, I don't want them here, they don't have a right to be. Sheriff Rogers sends a letter to the FDA, and he says, you are not going to go onto their property without a warrant. If you do so, I will remove you, by force if necessary. The FDA sent him back a letter and said, you know what, we're just going to drop this. Because they didn't have a right to be there. But as long as they're allowed to do what they don't have the right to do, they're going to do it. But Sheriff Rogers says no. And he's not the only one. This is not an isolated story. There's a rash of this. They just don't report this in the news. You don't hear about this because, for one, it would tell people like us, wow, the federal government actually doesn't have the authority. They don't want people to know that. Now, there's all kinds of nullification. What we've been talking about up till now is legislative nullification, where the state government itself nullifies a particular law because it is not within the constitutional authority of the federal government. Now, this is a case of jury nullification. You may not have known it, but anyone who is constitutionally set up to do a purpose, whatever that government purpose is, has the right of nullification in their specific job. A jury who is charged with finding the innocence and guilt of someone can actually find them not guilty if they don't feel that the law the person broke wasn't illegal in the first place. Now, that's not something that the lawyers tell them when they're doing it, but that has actually been the history of a jury since juries were created. They have all the power. It is their job not only to decide if the law was broken, but to decide if the law was against their rights in the first place. And that's what happened with this gentleman here. His name is Alvin Schlondigan. Now, these are both farmers, but he ran a co-op. And what this co-op did is there were a bunch of members, they all bought cows, and then him and his family would milk the cows for the people, members of the co-op, so they could have raw milk. And that was, of course, made illegal, and they found him guilty. They tried to, They charged him, they took him to court, and the jury said, you know what? They don't have the right to tell you you can't have raw milk. So we're finding you not guilty. That was what the jury did. Now, that was the end of it. They didn't try him again. They didn't throw the jury in jail because the jury had every right to do that. So nullification is not just something that our state government does. It's something our sheriffs can do. It's something that our treasurers can do. It's every constitutionally elected, appointed official from top to bottom not only has the right, but they have the duty to do these things. It is their responsibility to fight for the Constitution in whatever capacity they have been assigned. Whether that's,
I'm sorry.
that's okay. Whether that's law enforcement
Yeah.
or legislative or the governor of the state.
A couple things that, from an action item, you know, well, this is all nice and good, what are we going to do to make this happen? Well, Greg's going to hand you out some blue card. This is called the Freedom for Virginians Act, something Greg and I wrote about 2 years ago now, actually. We need a sponsor for it. And basically what it does is it sets up a state procedure to nullify. It sets up a procedure how you would do it, and it sets up and it puts an obligation upon, instead of leaving it up to each individual area to determine what they're going to do, it actually makes the state officials follow the nullification procedure and interpose itself. Now, legislators hate this. I mean, they hate this more than anything, which means it's a good piece of legislation, by the way. Because if legislators hate it and don't like it, then you know you're on something right. So obviously there's no sponsor for this, but we need to get people educated to this. The biggest thing is that people don't know we can do it. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for the people who put the secession petitions out there, but it's a big waste of time and energy. Honestly, it's just silly. This actually, not only can it work, but it has worked. It didn't work 150 years ago. It's worked 2 years ago. And it's worked, it can work today. It's working now. It's working right now in some of the northern states. What we're trying to do in Roanoke is get a Nullified Now tour. All the guys you saw in the movie will come to your town and basically do like a 2-hour show for people. And they promote it, put it on TV, advertise, they bring Sheriff Mack, a bunch of high-profile people in, and we need that kind of publicity to get people to understand this is an option. Because you're not going to, I mean, this is the history of our country, and our children are not being taught this history. Because basically it's not going to happen. This is all just nice talk until a lot of people get together and say, we're done, we're tired of playing around, we know we can't fix Washington, electing a congressman is not going to fix anything. You know, we can't, I mean, fixing Washington from the outside, Obama was right, you can't fix Washington from the outside. You got to fix it from the states. It's got to happen at the state level. We mentioned the 10th Amendment Center. Tom Wood's book, Nullification, is great. Not only does it, you mentioned about a repository, it has an example of every single state nullification action that happened prior to the Civil War, and lots of examples of what happened since then. It's about 4 years old now, but there's been other things that have happened since then.
It's very well sourced.
Yeah, it's a beautiful.
I mean, the footnotes are very specific. Everything that the first half of the book is the book. The second half of the book is all the source material, and it's all there so that you can find where these things originally came from, so that you know what you're reading is true. It's not just somebody saying stuff. It's a very well researched book.
So, you know, I'm just going to close, and I can take some more questions if you want, if you have any. But Bruce, you're probably there in 2010 when we went to Richmond and passed the Healthcare Freedom Act. And that's basically the piece of legislation that Ken Cuccinelli used to base his lawsuit for the Obamacare suit. At that time, the Democrats controlled the state Senate, yet they still passed this piece of legislation. And the reason why is because 3,000 people got off their duff on a cold winter day in January, marched on Richmond, made a lot of noise, scared a lot of people, and 4 or 5 Democrats flipped. The only way you're going to see nullification happen is if 3,000 or 4,000 people show up in Richmond and demand it. That's the only way it'll happen. It worked for Sherman Booth, and it worked for Joshua Glover. If 3,000 people don't show up and bust him out of jail and did the right thing by saving his freedom, none of this happens. It's up to us to defend our freedom, and it's not going to happen if we're going to wait for state representatives and federal representatives to save us from something. If we're going to save this country, it's going to have to be us, And nullification provides us the mechanism to do it if we have the courage to stand up for it. We can find the people to run for office who have the courage to actually do it.